Today we're pretty excited to have Dr. Dwayne Beck, South Dakota State University, is going to talk to us about crop rotation's effect on soil health.
It's good to be here. Yeah, Dakota Lakes Research Farm is a farmer-owned entity that is operated in association with South Dakota State University. That's it. That shows me where we're at. We're right on the Missouri River, east of Pierre, South Dakota, and it's actually right along the Missouri River, meaning Lewis and Clark walked through here in 1804, which is important. That's an aerial photo of the farm. It's fairly dry country. We get hot and dry, true continental climates. If you really want to look at long-term rotational effects, you have to have probably something other than university involved. So we have a group of farmers that put this place together in 1990. Before that, actually, we started operating in 1990. And we have rotations that have been going since 1990. And this link will take you to a video we shot this year for a virtual field day that shows you very well the differences in soils that have occurred with all these differences in rotations long term. So we won't really try to do that here today so much. All tillage tools destroy soil structure. All tillage tools decrease water infiltration. All tillage tools reduce organic matter, and all tillage tools increase weeds. And I do that because I say that because a lot of people keep talking soil health, but they really don't want to get rid of the tillage part of it. And we've never done tillage at the farm since I've been here. So it's been, when we started in 1990, we've never done tillage. Tillage impact on infiltration, and we got started trying to keep water going in the ground under irrigation. One pass with a vertical tillage tool, this is Kansas data, will cut your infiltration in half. Strip till is fairly popular. It was at times. We did some work with that and gave up on it because it has too many problems. So here's a strip till field. How do you follow that? You do a good job, and then you have two different flushes of weeds. You have this problem if you go up and down a hill of erosion happening. Here you see corn coming out of that slot, but there's no way that you can leave that there. You've then got to go out and try to fix that. So it's not really solved the problem. We found out it was just too many negatives, and we concentrated. We looked at what happens with the corn plant. This is a corn plant that's coming up. Seed is a dominant source of P up until V1. So you don't necessarily need much there until you get to V2, when that plant perceives light, it starts to grow its roots, but most of those develop above the seed. And a lot of people who grow corn haven't really thought about where the roots are. And with that in mind, we have developed a system where we have the fertilizer there. We think that's where it should be, but we're putting it on at the same time that we plant. So this is our machine. We've developed a lot of commercial stuff, can do the same thing, just got to order it on the machine. We're placing the fertilizer at the same depth as the seed and 3 inches to the side. And again, that's the reason it's 3 inches to the side, that's where the roots are. We have a group from Iowa coming tomorrow. We're going to take them out, dig up a corn plant and show them that there's really not a lot of roots that go directly down from the seed, they go out. So that's where you want to intercept that fertilizer. That means we can do a lot less disturbance. We leave the residue from last year's crop in place until this year's crop has a full canopy. So that's the best weed control we have. We do get response to placing the nitrogen, especially. If you look at this slide, and if you go to our website, we have lots of fertilizer studies there. If we put the nitrogen 3 inches to the side, like we talked about and did different things with phosphorus, the big response is to when we stop putting the nitrogen in that side band, if we put it over the row or if we put it between the rows. And then we get that big decrease in yield. And that's very consistent. And it's not just our research, that's been done all over the Corn Belt. 11 studies, 11 no-till studies and 11 conventional till studies. Only one conventional till corn crop responded to starter fertilizer, whereas 8 out of 11 of the no-till ones did. And there's some nutrient cycling reasons for that. There's some reasons for that associated with the cooler soils maybe, but it's really a nutrient cycling thing. Phosphorus, on the other hand, we found that after all these years of no-till, we're much less likely to get a response to phosphorus placement and to phosphorus itself. And I won't talk about that much today, but you notice that our Olsen P test there at the top is 5 parts per million or less. And that is on all of our irrigated ground because we're right next to the river. So we've been able to run our Olsen or our soil solubility of phosphorus way low, and because of mycorrhizal fungi, not get a response to large additions of phosphorus. And that we're excited about that data actually. Basically our fertility management, we put some starter P with the seed because you do have to maintain a certain amount if you're going to export and sell your grain or whatever. Other nutrients are placed near the row at seeding or on the soil surface after canopy. If we broadcast the fertilizer before or at seeding, it just encourages weeds. So we're trying to starve the weeds as well as get that nutrient where it needs to be, the 4R thing. So available nutrient, if you have available nutrient, moisture and roots in the same place at the same time, that's really what you have to have. And with the mycorrhizal fungi, we're really looking at a situation where we have a massive root system because of them, so we can run lower available phosphorus. Here's a cover crop study we did. Now these cover crops are all real low carbon and nitrogen ratio cover crops. We don't use that kind of cover crop very much because we want to build carbon in our soils, but this is a study we did with ARS people on a farmer's field. And then we put in these different cover crops, and the next year they grew corn and either fertilized it or didn't fertilize it. And there's a big response to fertilizer even with the low carbon and nitrogen ratio species, and both in yield and then in protein as well. The one that came the closest to supplying some nitrogen or enough nitrogen would be something like a canola and a cowpea or something like that. But there's the protein differences, not as distinct, but still distinct. We do get nitrogen release at times. It's most consistent on our irrigated ground. Here we had 108 pounds of nitrate nitrogen, and we only had to add 36 pounds of N to actually get us up to 236. But we had a very massive low carbon and nitrogen ratio cover crop there, which we can't really do that on our dry land because we wouldn't have enough residue. We like to say to people, I'm a farmer, it takes sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide to make them into products I can sell. That we get kind of hung up on this thing that I'm going to grow corn or I'm going to grow soybeans. I did a Zoom to Argentina to Opera Seed Conference yesterday, and they grow just almost all soybeans there, which is destroying their soils. We want people to focus on having the soil wet during the dry part of the year, like now. It's been very challenging for us the last couple of weeks. We were 106 degrees yesterday and 103 the day before. So it's a bit challenging for our dry land system, but we will have good crops this year, or have crops. We had an excellent wheat crop. So most people focus on having the soil dry during the wet part of the year so they can get it planted early. And that's kind of the wrong attitude. If you do things that take away your moisture, you may not have it later. Focus on having the soil cool during the hot part of the year. And I think that's one of the things when we get this hot weather, if the soil gets too hot, it doesn't function well. we try to keep the soil cool even when we have these really high soil temperatures. And but again, people focus on having it warm so they can be the first guy to plant. We like to remind people they don't harvest corn in June. So having the biggest corn in June doesn't count. This would be a typical look at a cover crop comparison. This is a forage millet. Underneath there are some cool season grasses, oats and barley and whatever. And as soon as this forage millet's on the right, starts to slow down because it's cool in the fall. We usually try to time it so that happens before it heads. Then the cool season species come on. So we're looking at a lot of high carbon cover crops to try to build our organic matter and our water holding capacity. That is stripper harvested using a Shelburne stripper head wheat crop. You can see the milk jug kind of in the middle there to give you a perspective on size. So on the one side, we're capturing carbon and we're sequestering the nutrients in the soil and adding organic matter. On the other side, we just left it idle, which leads to more diseases and more weeds and more problems. Here's another example of that. This example here, we do a lot of grazing, which I'll talk about in a bit with during the winter of these cover crops. We have done the polyculture with alfalfa and corn mixtures. In this case, we had them both in the same physical location, and the corn would outcompete the alfalfa, and it didn't do well. And then we start planting strips. So we have 2 rows of corn, we're in 20-inch rows, 2 rows of corn and 1 row of alfalfa, and 2 rows of corn and 1 row of alfalfa. That's kind of worked. It's a bit more difficult management than some people are talking about, but it's like that 60-inch corn idea that where you put cover crops in between, but this is a perennial, and we want to look at getting perennials into the system to help with our cycling of nutrients. If we look at these root systems, the native prairie, actually I'm looking out the window at some big blue stem, even in central South Dakota, that's one of our native species, and they have these tremendously deep root systems that will take the moisture out of that very deep profile and also bring the nutrients up to the surface. And what we do with growing just row crops or just annual crops, we never do suck that bottom 2 or 3 or 4 feet out of the system. We work with the top 1 or 2 feet, and cover crops help us some, but they don't really get the depth, at least here, that you can get with a perennial. So we're doing a lot more work now with looking at perennial sequences. I call this catch and release nutrients with cover crops. If you don't catch them, they're going to go down a drain tile, or they're going to be gone. In a lot of cases in central South Dakota, we're dry enough they don't really go anyplace. But we want to get them to a point where we can use that nutrient to catch more carbon, because whatever. Soil biology is really what we're looking at in a dry, or what Alan Savory would call a brittle environment. Soil biology slows during times of low soil moisture. The ruminant grazing animals, like right now, the animals that are out on our cover crops, remain moist, continuing those biological processes when the stuff in the soil is kind of stopping. And probably more important for us, in cold climates, soil biology slows during times of low soil temperature during the winter. And the ruminant grazing animals remains warm during this period, which allows our soil biology and biological processes to continue during that winter time frame. So here is some cover crop. This is a mixture of oats and barley and lentils and peas and some brassicas. And we will swath that, windrow it, whatever you want to call it. It'll stay in that swath into the winter, because we have a cold, dry winter, stays nice and green. And then our cows will eat that as their winter feed. So we don't have our cattle in feedlots. We don't haul feed to them. The cows have legs, is what we like to say, and they should go get their own food. We do use our irrigators to move the fence. So you notice that we got fence hanging down from the irrigation. So instead of pushing posts in the ground and stuff, we just move the irrigator. Quite a bit nicer when it's 30 below. So there's the irrigator wheels. So consequently, you notice the wheat straw from the wheat crop that was planted and harvested for grain before we planted the cover crop is still there. It's just laying down in between those rows. We have a full level of armor on the soil, and then you don't even see the swath because they've cycled that. Weeds and diseases are nature's way of adding diversity to a system that lacks diversity, and our key here is we've really focused a lot on diverse systems, so we don't have to spend as much on herbicides and other pesticides. We think in order to get adequate diversity, we'll probably, and adequate intensity, we'll probably have to use perennials in the system, whether we plant them in a pattern at the same time or we actually plant them in different phases. If you have a weed or disease or something, we see that as us allowing Mother Nature to do that. She's an opportunist and we provide the opportunity. A lot of people are using herbicides post-emerge. That's the wrong time to do that. It's not the weakest part of the life cycle. And then you get the resistant weeds. Way back in the old days, we developed kochia weed resistant to pursuit on purpose because they told us it wasn't going to happen, so we showed them that it would. Nature's efforts to add diversity, therefore, should be countered by adding beneficial diversity to the system. We've had no need to apply broadcast insecticides at Dakota Lakes. This is actually 18 years. And I must admit that at our north unit, we did spray one field for grasshoppers. And that's the first insecticide we've used in 18 years. No-till is not about lack of tillage, but about managing soil, water, soil structure, and especially carbon compounds in the soil. Strive to produce a crop which is healthy, not a crop which does not get sick. And again, we come back to this idea of having to change everything. If all we do is change tillage in an attempt to get soil health, we won't get there because we'll have this other stuff go wrong. And either the guy will go back to doing tillage or he'll have to start using lots of inputs. We talk about cultural practices, technology, and management. The cultural practices are tillage and rotation, sanitation, and competition. If we take tillage out, we have to replace it with these other cultural practices: rotation, sanitation, and competition. In nature, tillage is a catastrophic event. It's one of those things that we really don't think that anybody should be using. Tillage is to agriculture what fracking is to petroleum. It does increase the speed of our ability to remove compounds from the ecosystem, but that's not what the goal of agriculture should be. That's a mining idea. So short-term studies are not accurate in terms of tillage and rotation, so we've decided we can't do everything. We haven't done a tillage comparison in over 30 years, but we've done lots of rotation studies. And Jim Cook and Roger Veseth in their Weed Health Management book talked about crop rotation, allowing time for natural enemies to destroy the pathogens. What we're doing is trying to use these natural cycles. Proper intensity, adequate diversity. So the intensity, getting the water use right, and then getting enough diversity to keep the problems away. Native vegetation is the best indicator of the range of intensities which are appropriate. And if you look at places where the tall grass prairie grew, we should have something growing at all times. And just growing a corn and soybean in the summer is going to lead to lots of problems with inadequate intensity, and certainly without enough diversity. So most growth problems that we blame on no-till are the result of inadequate diversity or improper intensity. We can fix those. Put this water that you save by no-till to work. That's where cover crops come in. More high water use crops cover crops and double crops at times. We want to see at least 3 crop types, and long intervals of 2 to 4 years are the real important part of that. And I think that I've shared my, if I haven't, it's on our website, our agricultural ecosystem management paper where we talk about all these different things. Here's a long-term rotation study we did for 12 years, and we had 15 different rotations in there. And Randy Anderson from ARS came and counted after 12 years, he counted the weeds in the different rotations that grew. We did put no herbicide on the last year, and he counted the weeds. If we did a 2-way rotation, which are the worst rotation, wheat, chickpea, in this case, could be corn, soybean, he had 94 weeds per square meter. We had 40 where we had a 3-way, 3 different crop types, and where we had 4 different crop types, it was 7. So that's about a 95 or 96% weed control difference just simply by changing the rotations. And we like to show this slide where I didn't dry very well. We put no herbicide on this wheat field and there's no weeds. And normally if you leave a skip like that, you'll be filled with weeds. Some experts propose using tillage as a means of addressing resistant weeds, and I respond that if tillage was so good at getting rid of weeds, they should all be gone by now. So I don't know why somebody's saying that. Here's a result of that one rotation study that ended in 2002. The alternate year rotations were significantly worse than anything that had variety to it. If we wanted to do half wheat, which was what they wanted to do at those period of time, we'd be better off to do this stack thing where we put 2 wheats in a row and 2 years out. So the secret is the long breaks. So profitability, we look at wheat fallow, which is the normal system at that time, not very profitable. Wheat corn fallow is better, but if I put another crop in and add even more diversity with wheat, corn, and pea, we're much better off. And so farmers would ask me, can you make money on peas? I just would respond to say, we don't have to make money on peas. We just have to lose less money than it costs us to do summer fallow. So if you could know only one thing about a soil, what would you want to know? You'd want to know organic matter. And within all texture groups, as organic matter increased to 1 to 3%, available water capacity essentially doubled. And everybody knows this. Does it really pay out in real life terms? Let's see if I can move that guy out of there. We have a rotation study that's been running since 1990. It's still going. These are field scale. These are actually our whole fields here. That's how we do the rotation study on the farm. We have large fields that are done in set rotations. Corn, pea, winter wheat in a dry year. We started this in 1990. In 2002 and 2006, when we had dry years, that 7.9 inches of rain was between the time we harvested the peas and we harvested the wheat. You can see that, that the yields are doubled. And even in the wet year where we had 23 inches in that little over a year, we almost doubled the yield. We didn't see that the first 8 or 10 years as the soils were responding and changing in response to the crop rotation in the thing. But in all those cases, if you look at those rotation, pea was a year before winter wheat and corn was a year before the peas. So the sequence, the 2 years before winter wheat are exactly the same in every one of those. But consistently, because it's too low in carbon, having that extra low carbon crop in the system, we have caused long-term problem with this rotation. What we've done now is to change that low residue rotation, soybean, corn, pea, winter wheat, that guy, we've thrown the soybean out and we put in a perennial sequence of 5 years. We do 15 years of that 3-way rotation and then 5 years of a grass. So this is in 2006. This is a weed in the low residue rotation. This is the weed in the high residue rotation. Those are right next to each other. If we look at them from an aerial camera standpoint, that's what it looks like. We see some of the same things with irrigated ground where moisture isn't necessarily the big problem. We have a rotation as corn, soybean, wheat, soybean, where we average nearly 80 bushel an acre on soybeans, whereas if we do corn, soybeans, about 65. Cover crop will increase the soybean yields a little, but changing that rotation increased it a lot, 15 bushel versus 7. If we look at our continuous corn, we've had a field that's been in corn since 1990. Corn, soybeans, also since 1990, and this corn, soybean, wheat, soybean rotation has been there since 1990. The average corn yields in those rotations are 203, 217, and 235. And that 235 is the average of those two corn years. That first year is quite a bit higher. The second year is more like the 217. If we add up how many bushels of corn we get and how many bushels of beans and whatever in those rotations, you'll notice that we produce, this is assuming 5,000 total acres farm, we produce more soybeans on less acres with that bottom rotation than we do with the corn soybean. So 2,500 acres of soybeans in the middle rotation and 2,000 the bottom one. And if we looked at that profitability, does it make sense to trade 72,500 bushels of corn for 120,000 bushels of wheat? Well, that's a no-brainer. And then we get another 350 bushels of soybeans, and we've caused less problem with diseases and weeds and whatever. As I said, I did a talk yesterday to Argentina. I took this photograph in the 1990s in Argentina when they were still growing a variety of crops, corn, soybeans, and wheat in rotations that had 7 years of pastures or perennial phase and 7 years of cropping. Plus they were using cover crops like black oats and hairy vetch and such in between. And the left and right there is where they had the hairy vetch and black oats versus no cover crop. That's what you see the difference there. And I had a friend of mine take some of that soil, took a spade and held it up, and I took a photograph. I don't know how you define soil health. You can define it any way you want to, but it's hard to write down a definition. But we all know one when we see one, and there's a healthy soil. The Argentine government shortly after this outlawed the export of beef and encouraged the farmers to grow soybeans. So the pasture phases went away and the crops like corn and wheat went away, and soybeans became almost a monoculture in Argentina and still is. In 2006, 10 years after I took that first photograph, I was in that same field, and this is what the soil looked like. That is not a healthy soil. Organic matter makes a difference. This is what the prairie looked like. These are Ruth and my daughters. They're much older than that now. They're all adults and they're engineers and they have good jobs. But this is what the soil looks like underneath the native prairies. Very deep root systems, very extensive. Not anything like we have with our cropping systems now. So if you want healthy soils, you've got to try to emulate that nutrient and carbon cycle that existed and water cycle that existed in those native systems. So that's what I have for today. It's a short version. If you want the long version, you can go to the agroecosystem management paper, and we talk about the different types of rotations and the benefits and whatever of those different types.